So year 8, we're continuing with the work that we were doing on genre before the Easter holidays, and we've got 2 more genres to look at. Today we're going to be looking at humorous writing, so writing that will make the reader laugh. Sometimes we tend to laugh at cruel things, then feel bad afterwards, but this is part of human nature. If we see somebody fall over or walk into a lamppost, it is funny initially, and then we have that moment of, are they okay? I better check. What I'd like you to start off by doing is thinking about any comedy programs or particular comedians, or it might be people you know, that you like the best, that you find the most funny, and try to write down why you find them funny. What is it that you find about those programs or about those people? What is it that's funny about them? Have a go at that and then come back to the video. So hopefully you've had a think about who you find funny and you've maybe identified why you find them funny. Have a think about this one. Why do you think humour is one of the most difficult genres to write? Well, if we were in a class right now, we'd have people putting their hands up and giving us different ideas about who they find funny. And there might be somebody who you find really, really funny, who other people in the class are thinking, oh, I don't find them funny at all. They're just so not funny. I hate them. Turn the telly off when they're on. And that's why humour is one of the most difficult genres to write, because what will be funny for some people won't be funny for everybody. So it's a really difficult genre to write in, but we are going to have a go later on today. So we're going to start off by listening to an extract from The Twits by Roald Dahl. Hopefully you'll be familiar with the story already. We're going to read a couple of chapters about things that the Twits get up to and see how we can continue with that story. Here we go then. This is the frog. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beer, Mr. Twit decided he'd put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into her bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark, scratching her tummy. Her tummy was always itching. Dirty old hags like her always have itchy tummies. Then all at once she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed. "What's the matter with you?" Mr. Twit said. "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. "There's something in my bed." "I bet it's that giant skillywiggler I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Twit said. "That what?" screamed Mrs. Twit. "I tried to kill it, but it got away," Mr. Twit said. "It's got teeth like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Save me! It's all over my feet." "It'll bite off your toes," said Mr. Twit. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. The frog crawled up from under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping about on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had just jumped on her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night. She screamed again. "By golly, it is a giant skillywiggler," Mr. Twit said. "It'll bite your nose off." Mrs. Twit leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and spent the night on the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow. The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big, long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron. At 1 o'clock, she cooked spaghetti for lunch, and she mixed the worms in with the spaghetti, but only on her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. "Hey, my spaghetti's moving," cried Mr. Twit, poking around in it with his fork. "It's a new kind," Mrs. Twit said, taking a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms. "It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot." Mr. Twit started eating, twisting the long tomato-covered strings around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon there was tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. It's not as good as the ordinary kind, he said, talking with his mouth full. It's too squishy. I find it very tasty, Mrs. Twit said. She was watching him from the other side of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating worms. I find it rather bitter, Mr. Twit said. It's got a distinctly bitter flavour. Buy the other kind next time. Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy? Mr. Twit wiped the tomato sauce from his beard with the corner of the tablecloth. Why? He said. And why it had a nasty bitter taste. Why? He said. Because it was worms, cried Mrs. Twit, clapping her hands and stamping her feet on the floor and rocking with horrible laughter. So what we're going to have a go at doing is continuing in the same style as the writer. So we're doing Mr. Twit's revenge. What would Mr. Twit do to Mrs. Twit to get her back for making him eat worms? Now it could start to get Mrs. Twit back for the wormy spaghetti, Mr. Twit, and then you'd carry on and tell the story from there. I don't just want one line, say, oh, well, he threw a spider in her hair or something like that. Make it into a story like the two examples that we've just read, the one about the frog and the one about the wormy spaghetti. Your work must explain how Mr. Twit might pay her back. Would he put something in her food or in her bed? They're not a very intelligent couple, so it's going to be quite a simple idea that he's going to come up with. The work should imitate the style of the writer, so it should be written in the style of Roald Dahl, and it could contain made-up words like the giant skilly wiggler. I want you to make sure you check your spelling and punctuation really carefully, and as with all your work, if you want to email it to me or put it in my folder on the folder on the computer, that's absolutely fine, and I can find it there to read it. If for any reason you really don't like Roald Dahl and this is something that you think, I'm not going to be able to do that, then we've got a different activity for you to do. So the other activity is to write about a humorous incident. So humorous means funny or that sort of thing. Draw from your own experience or make it up. It might be something that's happened to you or you've seen happen to somebody else and you're going to tell that story. It needs to have a good idea. It should describe only about half an hour's action and contain between 1 and 3 people. And it could have conversations in the present tense and have narration and description in the past tense. Whichever of the pieces of work that you do, I want you to check them really carefully. If you've done the Roald Dahl one, then check, have you imitated the style of Roald Dahl? Does it sound like something that he would have written? Have you checked your spellings with a dictionary or a spell checker? Have you made sure you've used capital letters for names? So when you say Mr. Twit, you need a capital M on Mr. and a capital T on Twit. Same with Mrs. Twit. Have you used speech punctuation correctly? If you're not sure about speech punctuation, have a look at the speech punctuation lesson that I posted over the Easter holidays. Have you included adverbs, so mostly words that ending with ly in your writing, slowly, quickly, randomly? Have you included lots of detail in your writing so that the reader can picture what is happening? Because that's what is going to help you with that final bullet point. Is your writing funny? If we can picture what's actually happening, it runs like a movie in our heads and it does actually make it funnier. So make sure there's lots of detail in there. Should give yourself probably about 15 to 20 minutes on this. See what you've come up with. Off you go.